Hello, and welcome to Follow Your Curiosity, where we explore the ups and downs of the creative process and how to keep it moving. I'm your host, Nancy Norbeck. I am a writer, singer, improv comedy newbie, science fiction geek, and creativity coach who loves helping right-brained folks get unstuck. I am so excited to be coming to you with interviews and coaching calls to show you the depth and breadth both of creative pursuits and creative people, to give you some insight into their experiences and to inspire you. Today's guest is Adam Dietz. Adam's creative journey has taken him from northern central Pennsylvania to Westminster Choir College in New Jersey, to the theater scene in New York, and ultimately back home to Pennsylvania. Among other things, we talk about how the theater industry has changed and how you can still exercise your creative side in a rural area. Here's my conversation with Adam Dietz. So let me ask you the obvious question first, or at least the question that seems most obvious to me, which is, what's it like auditioning for shows in New York? Is it like what we see on TV, or is it really, really different?
Or just somewhat the same. There's the drama and the stress, and there's the hordes of people. And I would say in the short time that I was part of that industry, which was about 4 years, I saw the competition just grow exponentially, and I think that was because of what we see on TV and all these kids that are maybe going to school for it. To study musical theater or even just voice performance or what have you, and they kind of are coming out of it still with this attitude. It's just like, well, I have this training now, and if I just go to this audition, I'm just going to make it big overnight, and that's just not how it works. It's like any other industry or type of employment. There's so many politics involved as well, as I've learned. Mm-hmm. So I would say the actual talent portion of what you bring to the table only probably counts for maybe 10 to 20% of actually what they're considering when they're looking to cast something. The rest is kind of based, well, what have you done? Who have you know? What do you look like? So, which can be very discouraging.
Sure.
Yeah. And so when you go to some of these open calls for, say, a national tour or something, and you have 400 people showing up, it's oh my gosh, first of all, you sit there all day, which some people don't mind, they bring stuff to do, or they, talk with their friends that they, see while they're there. Other people, that really works on your nerves for the whole day until you actually get a chance to go in and
I'm sure that helps the other.
And and then sometimes you're in there for such a short time, so as it is, and then sometimes if it gets to the point where, okay, we're really running behind, even if they have a few days of auditions, they might say, well, instead of singing your 16 bars of music, you can only sing 8. I've had that happen. That happen a lot. What do you do with 8 bars of music? Sing your loudest high note you possibly can.
Yeah. That's amazingly little.
Yeah. So, and because I didn't study musical theater, my degree is in music education, I didn't have the dance training, I didn't have the acting training. I had experience from high school productions and stuff that I did in college. And I think that was another change I started to see in the industry, especially after the economy tanked, is that, they were only looking at kids that really were triple threats. Because, theaters couldn't afford to hire separate dance troupes to come in and do those numbers, and then have your leads come in and sing all the big songs, that sort of. So, so that kind of really limited me. And I accepted that, but, so that's even more reason. I was just okay, I think it may be time to just move on before it got to a point where I left that world with a really bitter taste in my mouth, and I didn't want that to happen because I enjoyed it too much. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Okay. So what kind of things did you do before you left?
As far as musical theater, or just in general in the city?
In general. Both.
Well, while I when I first moved to the city, I moved to Manhattan from Princeton, New Jersey, and I was working, I always had a church job, which was a totally new concept to me when I moved to Princeton, because around here, people that were involved in their church that way just volunteered their time because they wanted to do it. So when I got down there and got to Westminster, I was like, you can get paid to sing? Like, that's like too easy. So I had a church job. I was working at Banana Republic. And so that was kind of my, really helped with the transition, because I was able to transfer to a store in the city. And had made some contacts, obviously, while I was at school and while I was singing. The gentleman that was the director of the church I was singing at in Princeton, he had a lot of good contacts in the city, and I had a few friends that had moved to the city before me, some upperclassmen friends. So that helped. So I had at least something to kind of get me started. So I kind of just started beating the pavement and, paying my dues that way and trying to work myself up the ladder, so to speak. And it took probably about the better part of a year until I started really booking anything. And like I said in my previous email, it was more regional work that I did. I'm trying to think what the first thing was. I think the first thing I did was probably like the summer after I moved to the city. I got booked for like a summer stock season. I was part of the Bucks County Playhouse company. They had their sister theater up in the Poconos, Pocono Playhouse, which is no longer burned to the ground. Lots of drama. But it's under different management now. But at the time, they also had an open air theater, which was just across the river on the Jersey side. So I kind of did stuff at all three that summer. And then, gosh, the rest of it's kind of a blur. But it was off again, on again. And then I had also got connected with a really good temp agency through a friend of mine shortly after I moved to the city. And they were great about finding me work whenever I wasn't on stage somewhere. They said, just come back to us whenever you need something. We'll do our best to find a placement for you. So that was nice to be able to fall back on. I was singing with Philadelphia Singers. I had started that while I was still in Princeton, and then maintained that for about the first year, maybe first 2 years I was in the city. And then at the busier I got, it was too much trying to go back and forth.
It's a lot of travel.
Yeah. There was a couple groups in the city that I sang with as well. One holiday season, I sang with a professional caroling group, so that was kind of fun. What else? So then, forward to, 2010, something like that, is when I started to pull out of the musical theater world a little bit, and my temp agency found me this gig at this private school on the Upper West Side, which started just as a receptionist, which quickly morphed into this much more extensive administrative assistant position in their admissions department. And then they hired me directly to be full-time through the school. And that was great, because I had never had like perks and benefits like that came along with it. I was really close to my apartment at the time. But it was like, I'd be there, 8 or 9 hours, and then I'd come home kind of drained from the day, because I was doing that type of work, but I was still at like a front desk area. So I was kind of dealing with both ends of the spectrum there. So a lot of times parents would come to me because they knew that I knew kind of what was going on around the school. And so you're dealing with their issues and whatnot. So I'd get, home and be like, okay, I have no energy to like pursue anything else right now, which, after a while that really started to bother me, because that, I wasn't in the city just to be working a desk job.
Right.
And I was definitely in a rut for a while. And it was really a struggle to try and dig my way out of there and figure out, okay, what is it really that I want to do, and how am I going to make that happen? So I was at the school for, I guess, 3 years, and we were and they had just expanded, and the building I worked in was a new facility, and so they were still growing, and so there was constant like change and transition happening, and there just was a lot of turnover in their employees, and I kind of saw the writing on the wall, but didn't have enough time to prepare myself, and it was just kind of like one day it's like, don't need you anymore. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And looking back, I don't know how I handled it as well as I did, but I think I was so ready for a change that it was the swift kick in the ass that I needed, because it's like, okay, now you don't have a choice. Now you need to do something and make a decision.
Yeah. It's funny how life does that to you sometimes. I've had that happen myself.
So I had about, I don't know, maybe like 2 months or so that I had enough of a cushion that I could kind of float on for a while. And then a friend of mine from college, who was also living in the city, had just launched this company called NYC Nannies, and which just exploded overnight. He was doing these radio broadcasts. He was on like Good Morning America, and he was on like the BBC, and like because it was like the hot new thing, because all these like high-profile families and celebrities were hiring men to watch their kids instead of women. It was just like the trend, you know, because they were realizing, oh, well, especially maybe single moms that wanted sort of that paternal figure in their kid's life, and it just took off. And so I think I was one of, if not the first placement that they did through that company, sort of like officially. I think they did some sort of trial period with some people. So that was nice because it was pretty much an after school thing for me. And it was allowed me time during the day to really focus on some other options that I might want to pursue. So I did that for, I guess it was maybe about a year, really. And it was like, okay, well, this is nice. I mean, the family treated me well. And it was nice to kind of have that flexibility in my schedule. But it was like, okay, nothing was coming together. And I was thinking more and more about possibly opening my own business, a small business. And I wasn't about to attempt that in the city because yes, there's a market for everything, but there's already, 100 people doing it.
Right.
So I was in a relationship at the time, and my circumstances were starting to affect that very negatively, so it was becoming very toxic between us, and we just made a decision really mutually that was just like, okay, we need to, at the very least, take some time apart and figure things out, and then, reassess things later and see what happens, go from there. Well, like I said before, things were starting to fall into place back here at home very quickly. And I just kind of took it as a sign. It's like, I think it would be good, if nothing else, to just get out of the city for a while and clear my head and see what happens back home. Maybe an opportunity will arise as far as a small business is concerned, and we'll go from there. So that was almost 4 years ago now. But it's been it's fantastic. I mean, I would do it again like that in a heartbeat, because I kind of hit the ground running when I came back here, which I think kind of helped with the adjustment. I mean, so many people that I've kind of told this story to, it's either like, oh my gosh, how did you, you're from a small town, in rural Pennsylvania, like, how did you ever adjust moving to the city? And it's like, well, I had connections, and while I was at Westminster, we did a lot of performing there, so I was somewhat acclimated. It wasn't a huge shock to me. Or I get the flip side. It's like, how do you, go from spending 8 years in the city to coming back to this? I was like, well, I knew what I was coming back to because nothing had changed. And I also took it as a sign when I found myself coming back to visit Pennsylvania much more, and I'd stay for longer periods of time, and then I'd get back to the city, and I'd be walking, to my apartment from the subway, and I could just kind of feel the weight just start to lay. I was like, okay, here we go. Because there's a constant energy in the city. I mean, it's true what they say about it's the city that never sleeps. It's absolutely true. And you can feed on that energy even when you're not necessarily part of it. It does kind of help motivate you and give some of you momentum to propel your life along, even though you're kind of living on the sidelines and living vicariously through what everyone else is doing. But there's also this just constant pressure to just impress everyone, and sort of one-up everyone, and, always looking kind of over your shoulder. It's like, well, what's the next best, bigger, faster thing coming along here, There's definitely, I think, that mindset. I mean, New Yorkers are very proud of their city, but yet they also still have this sort of notion. It's like, well, the grass is definitely green on the other side. So if we see the potential that something better is coming along, we're going to go for it. And that holds true even in relationships and trying to meet someone. I mean, because you kind of feel like you never have their undivided attention, because it's kind of, yeah, And I found myself kind of falling into that times too. I mean, it just, you don't realize it's happening, and you're kind of like, oh yeah, well, this person's great, but look at that person just walked in the door, sort of, And it's like what? It's like, wow. Who am I becoming? Yeah. So that was another reason that it was just time to get out. And so when I moved back, I guess, I don't know if you have any other questions from all of that before we...
I do, actually. There's one in particular that I want to get to before we get too into Pennsylvania and away from New York. Because you mentioned how the industry changed. Mm-hmm. Was it just because the economy shifted, or were there other things that were going on there?
The economy, as far as what theaters, their budgets and what they could spend on things, that affected it. But then, like I said, just the growth of the competition, the level of interest in musical theater just seemed to spike, over a very short time. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like, okay. And I mean, I don't mean to sound conceited, but like I'd be standing in line outside of audition rooms and hearing people ahead of me. It's like, well, I can sing circles around that person, but they're not going to hire me because I, can't dance this part, or I don't maybe have the right look for them, or I haven't worked with this director, I haven't done, all these national tours or this cruise line or whatever. And I get it, but yet it's kind of like, well, you need experience to get experience, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I don't know if there's any other sort of just specific factor that really stands out as to why it changed. I'm not sure, but when you look at what has been on Broadway the past few years, there seemed to have been even a change in what was being produced, and even like the sound that you heard on stage as far as vocal sounds. And now it was really leaning towards a much more poppy, pop rock sort of thing. And now I feel that there's another shift where kind of maybe going back to that more classical sounds, classical Broadway sound, I should say, which I appreciate, not just because of my training, but I just think, well, those are the people that are going to have careers, really. Mm-hmm. People that know how to use their voice properly. We don't and it's okay to not really maybe make it big, so to speak, until you're in your 30s or 40s or later. I mean, that has happened a lot in the Broadway industry. So, because your voice is still developing, when you're in your 20s. So, to hire someone who says, oh, well, you have the exact look like you want and blah, 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 blah. And they're up there in a role singing about something that they really know nothing about. It's like, what can you bring to that role, really? So that personally for me was something that was always sort of frustrating.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's a really good point. I don't think a lot of people think about that, mm-hmm. that, your own life experience goes into what you can do on stage.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. In your email, you'd mentioned to me that you could feel your soul slowly dying
at
the desk
true.
job.
Yeah.
And I think that,
I'm just not wired for that. I'm not.
Some of us just aren't.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of people who can relate to that feeling, but I'm wondering, how did that manifest for you, and when, what made you realize that, no, really, this is toxic, I got to get out of here?
I feel went through a little bad depression there for a while. I mean, not like severe clinical depression, but there was just kind of I just did not, in some ways, I am very much a creature of habit and like having routine in my life, but when it comes to my work, I need variety. Mm-hmm. I can't just be doing that 9-to-5 desk job every day. I'll just go insane. So yeah, I think that was just so draining, to just have that type of monotony in my life. And then it's just I just didn't have any ambition to really do anything, or even have much of a social life, honestly. Even though at that time I was probably making more money than I did at any other point while I was in the city. It's just kind of I just want to go home and pour myself a drink and just watch Netflix or something, So, which is not why you're in the city.
Right. Right. So, probably feels like a waste of what you could be doing while you're there.
Pouring all this money down the drain in rent.
Yeah. Yeah, New York City rent is nothing to blow off easily.
No. So, and that, when this whole notion of possibly moving back started to become much more solidified, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm paying more in rent what most people pay in their mortgage.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that just became more and more appealing. And I've noticed, I would say the last maybe year or two that I was there, in both watching some of my friends and just, watching headlines and just, things on social media and whatnot, I feel like there was a little bit of a shift, and maybe it wasn't across the board in large cities, maybe it was just New York, but it was kind of it just seemed like, in a way, New York was kind of over to some people, and they were just getting out. They were like, okay, we're done with this lifestyle. We're realizing the benefits of something a little bit slower paced, not in a major metropolis. And when I moved back here and got connected with some community organizations, including at the time, it was a new local revitalization committee, and some of the people that I met through that served the surrounding counties. I saw it even more. I saw families moving into these types of areas that were just looking for space, for green, for good schools, and just still maybe having access to the things that they found in the city. They didn't want to be hours and hours away from that, which we're not here. You know, Williamsport, 45 minutes away. Harrisburg, 45 minutes away. Hershey, Philadelphia, they're not that far, really. So, yeah, I think that's something that's still happening. So we'll see.
Fair enough. So, I mean, I think especially for creative people, finding yourself without an income can be super terrifying.
Oh my gosh, I've always been poor.
Much more than for, say, an accountant who's just going to go out and say, I'm going to get another accountant job. So when you found yourself in that situation, how did you figure out what you wanted to do next? Did you have like a process, or did it just sort of come naturally?
When I lost a job at the school, or when I moved back here?
Probably both. I mean, it sounds like you sort of fell into the nanny thing.
Yeah, which, I mean, they paid me well, but it wasn't like, you know, it wasn't like I was making a 6-figure salary.
And it wasn't what you ultimately wanted to do.
No. I still had the church job. I still, you know, always did like a professional singing gig whenever I could pick up something like that. Because that was easy money, you know, and didn't take up a lot of my time usually. So I just had to learn to really kind of strap myself down financially. It's just like, okay, you can't go out to eat at all these nice restaurants, you know, every night or whatever. You can't go out and spend $50 on drinks with your friends, you know. So, yeah, I mean, my parents helped me. I mean, they have just been so generous and loving and supportive, because moving to the city was not anything that they, I think, ever anticipated or were really in favor of. I think they just kind of got used to it. So, in fact, at least the first year that I was up there, they kept my car that I had when I was in Princeton, just thinking it's like, oh, this isn't gonna, you know, this won't last, you know, and then he'll move back or he'll move somewhere and he'll need a car, so it'll be here. Well, the car has since been sold a long time ago. So, you learned how to become very frugal in the city, which doesn't sound possible, but it can be done. And then when I moved back here, like I said, my parents had bought the house that we are now sitting in, and they were sort of looking at that as just a possible investment. Either they would fix it up, rent it out, or maybe flip it. And then when I moved back, really didn't want to be that time, how old was I? 31, I guess. Didn't really want to be living at home with my parents any longer than I had to be.
I can't imagine why.
So I was like, I can handle next door as long as I have my own space. So we just dove headfirst into a renovation here, which was much more extensive than what they probably would have done otherwise. Then I think I lived at home with them for about 6 months, I guess, until this place was inhabitable again. And then the church that we are members of and attended approached me about taking over as music director there. The lady that was doing it for several years, who was a good friend of ours, was just ready for a break. But knowing my background and my training, they realized that having some dollar signs behind that might be much more enticing, which it was. Sure. So I was like, okay, yeah. So I started doing that, and then I applied to start subbing for the local school district, and then, like I said, then they approached me about helping with the shows at the high school. What else was I doing? I was in the summer. I mean, I was always doing landscaping jobs for people, or even just mowing lawns, which sounds really sort of pathetic in a way, but I enjoy it. It's kind of like, to me, it's very therapeutic. I can just kind of like be alone in my thoughts and clear my head, that sort of thing. And then last summer, the chorale, they hired me to come on the executive end there. So again, I have income coming in from different places. It definitely provides a lot of variety. There are, definitely some busy points in the year when I wake up, it's like, okay, who do I have to do what for today? That sort of thing. And that's just, that's kind of where I am right now. I am still toying with the idea of a small business. Been looking at a couple spaces locally. That's very daunting because I don't really know what I'm getting into exactly. Right. I've thought about starting to try and do something out of my home first, or maybe have a partner. But I really like the possibility of being able to control what I do. I think as a creative person, when you have that mindset where you kind of want to mold things the way you want to shape it, and just have that freedom, that's very alluring to me.
Yeah.
And I'm also a perfectionist, but I think that's just is the nature of a lot of creative people. So it's just like, okay, I want to just be able to do this exactly how I want it and be my own boss, and see what can come of it, what I can make of it. And I think anyone that has opened their own business, you have to throw yourself into it. I mean, 24/7 until
it's not really, a small thing.
Yeah, it's not.
Only in name.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your story about the car made me wonder. I mean, when you decided that you wanted to pursue music in the first place, even maybe when you were a little kid or when you were in high school, how did your parents respond? Were they supportive? Or
absolutely.
Were they kind of like...
Yeah.
Okay.
I definitely get... I get my musical inclinations from my mom's side of the family. So I was always exposed to music at home. There was always music playing, and then when I was probably around 5 or 6, my parents bought a piano, and my mom and I actually started taking lessons at the same time.
Oh, cool.
And then she went back to work full time and just couldn't keep up with it. And I think anything like that comes harder when you're an adult. Mm-hmm. But I was, always singing in like the children's choirs at churches, and then just kind of moved up through the ranks there. And then when I got to high school, was involved in everything, chorus and band and marching band and drama and all of that. So, but I still had this interest in landscape architecture. So when I was looking at schools, I was actually initially only looking at places that offered programs in both, which are few and far between.
I would think so.
Penn State was one of them. But in the end, the music won out, and like I said, obviously ended up going to Westminster. So, but yeah, they never, they never really thought twice about it. They were very supportive and encouraging from the get-go, because they saw it was like, it came so naturally, mm-hmm. and I enjoyed it so much, and I excelled at it. It wasn't like someone's like, oh, well, you're such a good singer, but you're really not.
Right.
So, yeah, I think they saw a lot of potential. They saw a future there with that. So,
that's great. That's such
mm-hmm.
a gift. It's such a huge gift. It seems to make a really big difference. Not that it's insurmountable if your parents are, kind of saying, are you sure you don't want to become a doctor and make money?
Yeah.
But it seems to really make a difference if you've got that behind you. It's much easier.
There are times when I feel guilty, and I'm sure it kind of makes them... makes them worry anyway, at the very least, that I'm not really using my degree, my educational degree, to the fullest extent. But, talk about the, education world, that's a whole other complication. But yeah, I mean, I had a great student teaching experience, and then I taught briefly. It was kind of like this long-term substitute position. That was before I moved to the city, and that was okay. I was teaching in a music program that was not well supported by the district, but I think the longer I was in the city and I was doing other things, I just kind of was like, I had no pull to want to go back to that at that point. I thought, I was like, well, maybe once I get all this out of my system, you know. And nope, never really came back around. And now, I mean, gosh, I've been out of the classroom really for so long that I would have a lot of catch-up work to do. I think just getting, you know, recertified whenever I would need to, and just, you know, and becoming familiar with what the new standards are and all of that. So I think that ship has sailed. But, you know, I definitely feel there are parts of my education that I'm still have helped me, and I'm still implementing into what I'm doing now. I mean, and if nothing else, just the vocal training, I mean, has definitely aided me. So,
well, if you're, you know, helping out with school musicals, you're still doing music,
like church choirs, you know, so, yeah. You know, and even, I mean, I'm an accompanist at our church, so I'm still keeping up with piano. So yeah. And I've thought about taking on students with piano and vocal, and so maybe when I can find, you know, 5 free minutes in my week to...
So what advice do you have for somebody who can feel that sense of slow death and needs to just kind of figure out their path?
It's hard if you don't... You got to have a good support system. I don't mean financially. I mean, even just, you know, a good support system in friends and family that can kind of just rally around you. But financially speaking, though, too, I mean, you can't make something out of nothing. So you gotta. That's a good question, because it's rough. I mean, everything costs money. So I would. Reading some good books helps. Just talking it out. I tend to internalize things a lot and then kind of get myself into these ruts, you know, and I think it helps if you can just voice it. Or if it helps you to just kind of write down what, like, you know, your hopes, dreams, and wishes are. Don't put a timeline on things. That never works. So this is my 5-year plan. Well, okay. We'll see. So I had a friend that I from high school that I hadn't seen in years and years and years, and we met up sort of randomly. That was probably a year or two ago, and we were kind of having a similar discussion, and she said, I have to, when I'm in those sort of places, make I forget what she called it now, like an inspiration board, so to speak. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like I need a visual, something to aspire towards. And I can see that working. I'm very much a visual learner, so for me, I could see the benefits of that. You can't just sit still and you know, just dwell on things and pine over it, because it's just nothing will happen. If anything, it'll just become worse. You know, you kind of get into a darker place. So you can, you know, even if you just decide to do something that's completely unrelated, like just go out and volunteer for something. Just be active somehow. Even if you're not doing anything at all connected with what you think you might want to do. I think that just kind of helps to get the creative juices flowing a little bit.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything that gets you out of that environment, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how has travel, and I define travel really, really broadly for the sake of this podcast, so it can be anything from, flying around the world to just the fact that you grew up here and then you lived here,
right,
and whatever. How has that influenced your creative life?
I haven't traveled nearly as much as I should have or would like to. That's just mostly because of time and money right now. But being at Westminster and then, ultimately moving to the city where you kind of get the best of the best, exposed me to what the standards are for a lot of different things. So, I guess that helped me. That's it gives you, it's inspiration. It gives you ideas. Oh, okay, I never thought about maybe presenting something like that. Or it's just, I think it just sort of encourage you to always be raising the bar in yourself, because okay, well, I can, if that's kind of what's on the pedestal is the pinnacle of what they consider the best of the best, well, okay, I can at least try and aspire towards that. I don't know. I haven't really thought of it that way before. Probably if I would travel more, I'd be better able to answer that question. So
I think sometimes you don't necessarily realize at the time or until you stop and think about it.
Yeah.
So, you may think of something later.
Okay.
Sure. And I have one final question, which is, a lot of people think if you move to a place like rural Pennsylvania, there's nothing happening here, or, there's not going to be able to do anything. I'm just going to be stuck sitting in my house or, talking to my neighbors. But, where would I go see a show? Where would I go do something? And I'm just wondering, what you think are the best unsung, overlooked, kinds of things in this area that people might not realize are here.
Well, hit pause. I'm going to go pee. And then I'll answer that question. Because they're right. Just not important.
Fair enough.
Hidden gems. Well, I will say, living in Central PA or any rural area like this, it's not for everyone. Even some people that grew up in it can't stand it and can't wait to get out, and that's fine. It's still very much an agricultural area. I think people really take pride in that. So there's kind of a strong sense of appreciation for maintaining and preserving just kind of the countryside. And so you have a lot of parks and state game lands and, these rails to trails that have sprung up just to take advantage of that, of the beauty around here. So again, maybe not for everyone. But there are sort of these recreational places coming up. You can rent canoes and whatever. There's a lot of wineries and breweries popping up all over the place. That whole industry really is taking off and becoming more popular. I think it's becoming sort of there's less of a stigma, it's less frowned upon. It's let's go grab a beer. It's it's okay, really. You're not a bad person if you go out and have a couple of beers. Take the edge off a little bit and forget about the day. So there's that. It's not, though, you can, walk down the street and walk into your favorite boutique store or, super... I want to say sort of yuppie cafe or whatever. It's just that doesn't exist, which is something I do kind of miss. I have to confess, just being able to a couple friends, like, hey, I'll meet you 5 minutes, and just have a great cup of coffee, that sort of thing, and be in that type of atmosphere. You have to get out of the area to find that sort of thing. Even shopping, I would say in general, we're a good 10 to 15 years, sometimes behind the trends till they kind of reach these nooks and crannies of the country. So sometimes you just have to be willing to get in a car and drive somewhere. That can be a little, that can be hard because you have to sort of really plan for it, It's like, okay, we're going to take a day trip and we're going to go do X, Y, Z, and you have to plan it out because it's not just, right there on your doorstep. Mm-hmm. But there are things around, and as far as like being involved and taking advantage of opportunities, there's, if you are a religious person or connected with churches, there's so much stuff happening at churches around here that they do for the community. So there's that. There's the chorale that I sing in is very unique. There's really nothing like that around here. So as far as the arts go, it's definitely a little thin. Not super culturally diverse either. I don't really see that changing anytime soon. There doesn't seem to be a drive to want to develop this area in that way. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. People seem content with that, and that's fine. So, yeah. It's probably about all I can say on that.
Okay. That's great, though, because, I think there is usually more in places like this than people think that there is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, all right, well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today, Adam.
Very much.
That's our episode. Thanks for joining me, and thanks again to Adam Dietz. You can find show notes, the 6 creative beliefs that are screwing you up, and more at fycuriosity.com. I'd also love for you to join the conversation on Instagram. You'll find me at fycuriosity. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners. See you next time.